Good evening, this is Deborah Wilson. I am in West Yorkshire. It's Saturday, the 22nd of December 2018. The time is 1800 hours and 40 minutes, and that's GMT. This podcast, I'm going to ask you to bear with me because I say with a great deal of embarrassment and a letdown to my generation at 61 because I'm perpetuating stereotypes and I still struggle with Twitter. In any case, I did a tweet with a thread on some examples of bottom-up security modeling from those who share an identity and within that identity shared vulnerabilities. And I will attach this podcast to that. So again, bear with me. So I have several examples. So again, what I look at is civil society's engagement with national security models. So that's bottom-up perspective of how civil society or its individuals view. I typically want to look at civil society, so groupings of civilians, and how they engage with national security models, how they understand them, and then how they respond. And one of the key responses would be their activism. But in this case, even though I'll name the examples that are not necessarily formal, quote unquote, civil society, but nevertheless, it's an example of bottom up engagement with security, or it's a case of an identity, persons with a shared identity. The particular challenge they have may not necessarily be under the purview, something that the state would need to address or has the remit to address. And in that case, it's not included in the national security model. So individuals get together to come up with their own solution. So the first example is the LGBTQ plus campaigners protest a new residential development in the heart of the city's LGBT space. And that's in Birmingham, England. LGBT plus spaces have typically been established in some cases because there was no other place for queer persons to go, and typically the overwhelming reason was it's a place of safety, a place either to live or to socialize with your significant others and or friends, and that if you were in these spaces you had a degree of safety that may not have existed in larger communities. So that would be an example of a bottom-up security modeling when there were times, and there are still places today that is not necessarily safe or not safe at all to be under the rainbow umbrella. So that YouTube video I thought was an example of persons under the rainbow umbrella coming up with a bottom-up security model, and in this case in Birmingham, England, defending that model and reasserting themselves as a group and saying, no, you won't encroach on the space that we've defined for ourselves, a space which gives us safety and validation of who we are. So the next example is again another YouTube video, and it also deals with something under the rainbow umbrella, but it would not necessarily be under the purview of something the state would address. Nevertheless, it's a security model from the perspective built from the perspective of citizens, private citizens. It is a security model, and this is preference or prejudice, and it's looking at prejudice from a mixed race household with Middle Eastern and Irish heritage. Riyadh, with his unusual name and fair complexion, knows firsthand how judgmental, and it deals with bias, ethnic bias within the gay dating spaces. And one of Riyadh defines himself, his own ethnicity, and there's also a man of African descent. And both gentlemen talk about the ways in which they protect themselves in spaces in which they're viewed as less than or constructed in a particular way because they're not white. The next example I'm going to give is from Monroe Bergdorf on being inclusive. And that looks at Monroe Bergdorf is a queer woman, and she is a trans woman, and her activism is a bottom up security modeling. It's a perfect example of it by speaking to the needs of and the rights of and the humanity of trans women. The state can play a role in this particular situation, but I'm not sure that it would choose to. In terms of, she looks at companies, fashion houses, hiring trans women, encouraging them to hire trans women. Maybe that could be addressed by the state. If it's fashion houses have always been able to play the card. Fashion houses and advertisers, their brand, and they've always been able to be less than inclusive under the banner of, well, it doesn't fit with our brand. So I don't know if that particular activism would ever be fulfilled, be eliminated by action from the state. In any case, you're looking at yet another example of a private citizen stepping up and saying, this is what we need as trans women, and this is why. So that's another example. Then the next example I have is a special report, Black Lives Matter, a British movement. And the description is Black Lives Matter is a rights movement surrounding anti-black racism in society, which has been mostly active in America. And this YouTube video talks about Black Lives Matter as it manifests here in the UK. It's specifically around, in the UK, the YouTube video focuses on police, less than appropriate police interactions between persons of African descent. This is exactly, there's no better example of a civil society constructed security model, bottom up security model, where the state has failed. So the state has a model, but persons of African descent don't feel they are protected by the model and indeed feel harmed by the model. So civil society, which is private citizens, from the bottom up have not only edited the model, but come up with suggestions and solutions. So not only do they look at the model and analyze it, but they make suggestions, they audit the model, then make suggestions for corrections. It's a perfect example of national security modeling being experienced by and then civil society, and then civil society responding to. So those are just a few examples. There is one more I would like to give you. I'm sorry about that. And this is about some activism, a campaign emerging out of Northeast England. It's a civil society. It's called Justice for Women and Girls, and it's a response to some women and females in the Northeast not feeling sufficiently protected from the potential of rape by rape gangs in the area. This would be like Black Lives Matter, in that it looks at this particular activism like Black Lives Matter, looks at a policing model, and in this case where in both cases it's they do not feel they're receiving the services of the policing model, and that the policing model has in fact failed them. So this is again a case where private citizens in a group, civil society, react to their experiences of a state constructed security, national security, or policing model by editing it and coming up with suggestions through their activism. I will post this podcast along with the thread on Twitter, and I'll post the link to the Twitter thread in the description box of the podcast. I apologize for my struggle with Twitter, and again, in this regard, I am unfortunately letting my generation down by being a stereotype when it comes to Twitter. In any case, this is Debra V. Wilson. I'm in England. I'm in West Yorkshire, and it is Saturday. Thank you very much.